Chapter 3. Even in the peaceful and familiar surroundings of her office, Addison couldn't get the image of that deplorable maze out of her head. It remained plastered to her brain like a horrific piece of art she wished she'd never seen. She did her best to push it away as she began typing search terms into the database. While she was usually more comfortable out in the field or even in a morgue, she rarely took for granted the amount of information at her fingertips anytime she was logged into the Bureau's database. She started with the most basic term, the name that she was certain she'd either heard or seen in the past week or so: Emily Torres. Javier, sitting beside her at the corner of her desk, was hunched over a stack of thin case files. His characteristic stern look was on his face as he sifted through them, looking for patterns or clues that might have been missed in the fearmonger's trail of terror. While Addison felt more and more certain Emily Torres and that god-awful maze weren't linked to fearmonger, she also knew that things would be a bit simpler if they were. Her search under Emily's name yielded a few hits, but nothing that would link her to criminal activity. The woman didn't even have a parking ticket on her record from what she could see. But then she saw her name as a secondary hit within a case file from 8 days ago. And when she saw the subject of the case file, Addison knew how she'd heard Emily's name before they'd seen her body. "I figured it out," she told Javier. "Already?" "Yeah. Do you remember the body they found in that old concrete water chamber last week?" "Yeah, out at the old Torrance Reservoir. What about it?" "The woman they found there was named Rachel Dunn. The coroner's report says she'd been dead for a few days before they found her. Emily's name is linked to the case file because a few days after the body was found, the police interviewed her." "They interviewed Emily Torres?" "Yeah," she said, still scouring the file. "But it doesn't say why, and it doesn't look like she had much useful information for the investigators." She delved deeper, scanning information at a speed that would make most heads spin, compiling data, discarding the irrelevant, and zeroing in on the facts that mattered. There had to be a reason why Emily Torres was linked to Rachel Dunn. And whatever that reason was, it had made those young women targets. As she dug deeper into Rachel Dunn, her name popped up again in a case from 5 years ago. The file itself made no sense to her at first, but the more she read, the clearer the picture became. "This is getting pretty weird," Addison said. "Javi, listen to this. 5 years ago, there was an awful accident at a carnival. One of those deals that comes through once or twice a year. Looks like one of the rides collapsed. A ride called the Octopus. Rachel Dunn was interviewed afterward during the official investigation. Seems like she did her best to help. She and a few others pulled injured people away from the ride." "Any connection there to Emily Torres?" Javier asked. "Not that I can see." Curious and with a tinge of anticipation of a possible lead, Addison pulled up the web browser. She ran another search, this time words Emily Torres, Rachel Dunn, Carnival. As the results loaded, Addison found what she was looking for right away. "Jackpot," she muttered to herself. She clicked the first result, an article written a little less than 5 years ago by a local paper. It told the story of the carnival accident. The final tally was 2 dead and 14 injured. But in the article, 2 names in particular were referenced: Rachel Dunn and Emily Torres. At the bottom of the article, there was an embedded video from a local news affiliate. "Look at this," Addison said, her voice tight with urgency. Javier came to look over her shoulder. She played the video. It was brief, just over a minute, but it was long enough to interview the ride operator, someone from the ride, and then Rachel and Emily. They both looked very young, Emily in her early 20s, but looking like she could still be mistaken for 16. Rachel looked a bit older and had clearly been more troubled by the entire ordeal. In the few seconds of screen time they had, both women were very humble. Emily even said she wished she could have done more. "Well, I think we can throw the idea of a coincidence out the window," Javier said. "Both women are right there, side by side." "He targeted them," Addison said. The killer had tossed Emily into a maze, and if this link was indeed the concrete to hold the case together, she had to assume that he'd also put Rachel into that water tank, and that the 2 deaths were linked. And I guess that might be why Emily was interviewed by the police following Rachel's murder, looking for any possible answers. This news story, it's not huge by any means, but it was a pretty public way to link them. But why kill them? And why take their lives in such odd, demented ways? Javi, she started, her tone laced with a dreadful suspicion. What if the killer chose them because of the accident? What if being survivors, or maybe even just trying to help, made them targets? Jesus, Javier exhaled, leaning forward as his eyes remained glued to the screen. You think our killer is going after people at the carnival the night of the accident? Maybe, Addison replied, her gaze drifting away from the computer to the files scattered across her desk. And there's something about the locations the bodies were found in. A maze, a water chamber. Do the reports say whether or not Rachel was dead when she was placed in that tank? The coroner suggested drowning as the means of death, so I'd guess not. I'd guess she drowned in that tank. She thought back to Emily Torres, recalling her passing thought of how the young woman had perhaps literally died of fright. The maze, the dark. Could it all have worked together to cause some sort of cardiac event? And if so, how did that tie to Rachel Dunn drowning in that tank? The silence that filled the room was heavy with the weight of unspoken thoughts. Addison tore her eyes away from the laptop screen, pushing back the swell of emotion threatening to compromise her focus. She knew she had to maintain a clinical detachment to see this through. When she'd been a medical examiner, it was much easier for her. The corpses told the story for her in most cases. But now, as an agent, it was her job to find the narratives to those stories, and not just in the tales the bodies told. Javier, who had sat in the chair on the other side of her desk, rolled to hers, nodding at the laptop. May I? Help yourself. His fingers flew across the keyboard, his eyes narrowed. What are you looking for? I'm looking for any archived articles on the accident, Javier answered. Witness statements, police reports, anything that can give us more context. She nodded and looked over his shoulder as he worked. The Seattle Gazette's archives came up with a click, and Javier typed in the date of the amusement park tragedy. A list of related articles populated, and he combed through each headline. There was plenty of reading material, but most of it spoke of negligence on the part of the carnival organizers and the medical reports of those who had been injured. Emily and Rachel were mentioned a few more times, but it was in reference to that original article and video they'd already seen. I think we need to talk to the families, Javier said when it was apparent they'd get nothing else related to the incident. Addison nodded, even though she loathed this step in the process. After nearly 2 years as an agent, it never became any easier. Speaking to a grieving family a week or more after the death of a loved one was hard enough. Speaking to them just a few hours after they'd been given the news was its own special kind of hell. Javier apparently noticed her hesitation. We need to know if there were any unusual patterns in their lives or threats made against them, Javier said. Any connection at all could lead us to our killer, especially with a link as unique as this carnival accident. I know. You okay? Yeah, I just hate this part. She wished she could take it back as soon as she said it. She knew it made her sound weak, almost like a spoiled child who was being forced to eat their vegetables. I know, he said, but you're getting better at it. Thanks, and you know. God, Javi, if this isn't fearmonger, that means there's 2 of these monsters lurking around. Javier nodded as he got to his feet and sighed. I know. So let's see what we can do about heading out to stop at least one of them. It was a bit cheesy in terms of a pep talk, but Javier's confidence was enough to get her moving. As they headed for the elevator, Addison was still a bit unnerved that even now, she saw those tall wooden walls of the maze in the old brewery. She felt like she was still in that tight, dark maze, and she wasn't sure she wanted to see what was waiting at the other end.